Welcome. My name is Joaquin Nunez for Postmedia, and with me today is Senator Marsha Blackburn, a Republican from Tennessee. Senator, thank you so much for your time.
Delighted to join you. Thank you for having me on.
I wanted to start this interview about the southern border because since Joe Biden became president, over 7 million people get into the country illegally, which is more than the population of 36 states. How do we get to this situation?
I think we got to this situation because President Biden's border policy is to have an open border. And because of this, you are seeing these 7 million, 10 million people spread across the country. And every state's become a border state. Every town has become a border town. And as I'm across Tennessee, what I hear from people, they're very concerned with that open border. It is probably the #1 issue because they're concerned about the impact of fentanyl in their communities, people that have lost lives, the way it has affected families. They're concerned about human trafficking and sex trafficking and labor gangs that are coming in, and the impact that this has on the individuals that are paying the cartels to come into the country.
It is a problem of lack of laws, or that existing laws are not being enforced?
I think what you've got is that laws are not being enforced. There are laws on the books that prohibit this. But what we have to look at is that Joe Biden's policy was on day one to start taking executive actions that would weaken immigration law and would make it easier to illegally enter the country. And in the first 100 days, he took 94 actions. And what we need to do is to secure that southern border so that we know who is coming in the country and we know why they are coming in the country.
Joe Biden recently blamed the Republican Party for not accepting his offer with Senator Langford for that unity bill. What do you want to say to that?
Yes, and what we know is that the bill that was discussed was a bill that would not do anything to secure the southern border. And as I have worked with Border Patrol and have been down on the southern border, what I find from ranchers and elected officials along the border, what I hear from Border Patrol is that they need 3 things. They need a physical barrier that will prohibit people from walking into the country. Where they can't have a barrier, they need better technology. And then they need more officers and agents. Last year, we had people from 150 different countries come to that southern border to illegally enter the country. And then they are going to areas across the country. The cartel has been very active on U.S. soil. And what we need to do is make certain that this ends and that people are coming legally and that they are able to apply to come into the country legally on visas, on work permits, things of that nature. And we need to make certain that Border Patrol has what they need to defend the safety and security of this country. And when you have thousands of people from countries of interest, when you have as many as 400 terrorists that have come to the border in the last 3 years, and then you've got the gotaways.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know who is coming in the gotaways. We should all be concerned for safety and security in our towns and communities and homes.
With that being said, what is the direct impact of this issue in the daily lives of the U.S. citizens?
Yes, and that's a good question to ask. And that is why I say every town's a border town. When you talk with local law enforcement and elected officials, they talk about this daily impact. And I think this is one of the reasons that the open border is such an issue with the American people. The fentanyl that is affecting our young people. Fentanyl is now the #1 killer of Americans ages 18 to 45. And when you look at that, and the prevalence of that drug is, a sheriff told me yesterday when I was out in a Tennessee county, he said just about everything we send to the lab to be checked is either fentanyl or it is laced with fentanyl. And so people see this, they know that local law enforcement and local emergency personnel have to have Narcan so that they can save the lives of people when they overdose. People that work in our hospitals and health centers talk about individuals that have illegally come into the country and then they come into the emergency room seeking help for healthcare issues, because they're not a part of the process of having a doctor, going for checkups, having insurance. We hear from school teachers and school principals that school begins and then they have so many students that are ESL teachers and needs ESL students, and they need teachers, and they want to be able to meet the needs of these students. And sometimes they're having to hire teachers for ESL students, and maybe they need 3 or 4 or 5. We have some school districts that have as many as 7 for different languages. We hear about the impact of human trafficking. I was in a community this week holding a county meeting, and they said they were so concerned with the amount of human trafficking that they were beginning to get young people who would escape, and they had been trafficked into the country, and they're not related to the adult that they were brought in, and they escape. And then they're trying to find someone who can interpret and help them in care for these children to get them out of those horrible situations. And you also see the impact of gangs and crime with smash and grabs and robberies and DUIs and car crashes. One community said that they noticed that the DUIs had doubled.
Mhm.
They started drilling down on this, and they found that 59% of those were individuals who were coming into the country illegally. So making certain that we look at this and that we end illegal immigration, and that we focus on what we need to do to make certain people know how to come to the country legally so that they are protected, so that they are not being being uh, pushed or
Mhm.
harmed by the cartel. That is something that is going to be important.
Okay, and moving on to the economy, President Biden insists that everything is going great, although 6 out of 10 voters see it differently. Is the White House out of touch with the reality of voters?
I think the White House is out of touch. Let me tell you, when you look at the fact that inflation is up 20% since Joe Biden took office. When Donald Trump left office and on Joe Biden's first day, inflation was at 1.4%. And of course, we all know that very quickly Joe Biden, with the elevated spending, with some of the mandates on businesses, the focus on the Green New Deal, inflation very quickly moved up to 9.1%. And I actually put on my website an explainer, inflation explainer, and it's on my blackburn.senate.gov website. And your viewers, your audience can go there and pull it down. But it shows what inflation was on day one and what has happened in the last 3.5 years with the cost of goods and services, and how the number is actually 20% overall. And how the price at the pump is up 54%, heating and cooling costs 41%, rent 33%, food 25%. That is what you are seeing in these inflation numbers. So I would encourage people to pull that down, and I would also make certain that individuals are paying close attention to what their price, what they are seeing there at the pump.
I also want to address your involvement in the Senate Judiciary Committee. How much harm can a federal judge that do not do its job properly can do? And what quality of judges the Biden administration has been appointing during these almost 4 years?
Yes, and that is something that has been of concern to us because people are tired of two tiers of justice. They want equal access to the federal government. They want equal treatment. They want equal justice. And having this two tiers of justice has been problematic. Now, when it comes to people that this administration has appointed as nominees for the federal bench, one of the things that has surprised us is the number of people who are wanting to go to the federal district or the federal appellate court, and they've never been a judge. They don't have any experience as a judge. And one would think that they would have been a state judge or a county judge or a city judge, that they would have had some experience on the bench. But it has been disappointing to see so many of these individuals that the Biden administration has put forward. They've never sat on the bench. So they've got to go through training to learn how to be a judge. They have been a law professor, or they've been an attorney for a nonprofit. Some of them have been activists. Some of them, like for the appellate courts, they've never even practiced appellate law. And then they're wanting to go be an appellate judge. So we've been quite concerned about that. And usually, regardless of who is in the White House, they work with the senators from that state. These are senators of each party to make certain that they find judges that are going to work for that area, that there can be agreement on that individual would be a suitable person to sit as a judge. That has not been the case with this administration. They have chosen people without the advice and consent. And see, in the Constitution, the Senate is required to provide advice and consent on these presidential appointments. But the Biden administration has circumvented that advice and consent and has moved forward on their own.
Senator, last question. Don't you think, regarding the Republican Party, of course, while in office, that it owes its voters some fiscal responsibility and lower spending?
We definitely think that spending ought to be lowered. When you look at our nation's debt and where we are at $34 trillion in debt, if you want to start to get some control over our fiscal issues, there are some things that need to be done. number one, you have got to freeze federal spending so you can begin to cut it.
Mhm.
And we have to have reductions in federal spending. And a good way to do that is to freeze federal hiring and federal salaries for a period of 3 or 4 years. And that way you have about 80,000 employees that attrition out of federal service every year. Many of these are through retirement. So if you freeze those positions and then work to restructure your different agencies and divisions, you can begin to make an impact on that, on those numbers. And then to begin to actually cut into that base on those spending numbers. I offer bills every year for either a 1%, 2%, or 5% across the board
Mhm.
spending cut on our non-defense, non-homeland security issues. And we should be doing that on that discretionary spending. So my hope is that you're going to see some fiscal restraint and some reorganization of the federal government so that we are able to tax less.
Senator, thank you very much for being with us today.
I'm delighted to join you. Thank you so much for having me.